up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Bff Show. My name is Brendan.
I'm Franco.
Franco, we have not done a show in a while. How have you been? I love your t-shirt. Tell me what's new in your life.
I've been pretty good. Since the last time we talked, I finished my 30 days of sobriety, which we talked about a few episodes ago.
Nice.
It wasn't like groundbreaking or anything like that. It was just, it's done. It was harder than I thought. Social pressures are mainly the reason, more than anything else, but that was wrapped. So I guess to close the chapter on that story that we'd opened up, it is shut. How are you doing?
Good. I had 3 beers yesterday, so 0 days on the sober train. It was a great time. Went to Golden Road Brewery. Enjoyed it. So welcome back, Franco, to Beer City.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll have a good time. Not that you're going to go crazy. Not that we haven't gone crazy. And we haven't gone crazy quite some time. We don't do that regularly anymore, not since college days. But we've slowed down as old age has slightly and very gently wrapped its hand around our throat, Franco. That's a dark way of talking about getting old.
Yeah, you went pretty cryptic off the bat. I feel like you started with like that public, like that service announcement. Kids don't drink too much because when you get old, death will wrap its hand around your throat.
Yeah. Gently. That's the word I use, Franco. Gently wrap its hand around your throat. Anyway, with that said, let's start talking about fantasy football. It is that season. It is that time of the year. Drafts have started. Some drafts start in a couple weeks. Our draft starts on Tuesday, as of this recording, on a Sunday morning. I am excited because, as the usual, I have not done any preparation besides vaguely jumping in on articles on The Ringer, on ESPN, just to get a sense of what's going on. But Franco, as typical, you do a lot of research. You are heavy into the world of fantasy. You have been the fantasy guru expert for 5 years going, 6+ actually. And I think, why don't we start with some of your thoughts about fantasy football? I'll jump in and shade in where I can, but essentially you are going to Van Gogh this thing, and I'm just probably going to do a touch-up on the side. So with that said, Franco, what are you sort of looking at into for fantasy football? What's your expectations for this year? Then we'll get into some specifics about who you're drafting and who you're not.
Yeah, I mean, I love fantasy football. I think it's one of the most fun fall activities you can really run. I think it keeps people connected and together. Because often you don't talk to your estranged friend Billy or Bob or Billy Bob Thornton, friend of the show. Yeah,
you beat me to it.
But when you have fantasy leagues, it enables that connection. And you and I have been in a fantasy league that's gone on for 9 years now. Yep. With Friends and Family League, it's pretty impressive. And we've had the core of about 7 owners the entire time, and we've had little guest starring roles, a Will Arnett, if you will. Pop in and out, say hello, and then leave. And a couple of guest stars have actually won the league and then left, which is unfortunate, including one of my ex-girlfriends, so boo to that.
Yes.
Her name will not make the trophy, not friend of the show. But yeah, the trophy we have not bought yet. But anyway, the point is I think it's one of the most exciting times of the year, and I think this year is wrought with a lot of huge expectations because we had a great rookie class. Like some of our stars are getting older. Tom Brady, Drew Brees are up there in years. Who knows if they see a Peyton Manning-like drop-off. We have Ezekiel Elliott. Will he rebound from the suspension season? Or is he garbage like I thought he was? It really all depends. So that's where we're at. That's my manifesto, I suppose, for the Open. Is Ezekiel Elliott garbage?
We can start there if you want. I don't know. I think for me, I agree with what you said too. I mean, fantasy football does keep people connected, particularly in the Friends and Family League that you graciously invited me to, that you started. So I've enjoyed being part of that for the last 9 years. It's been a long, long time. But I think, various degrees, and I think I don't really get into it until draft day, and I think that's part of the problem. Like, there's just so much volumes of information that are out there that is constantly changing, and it's become fantasy football is its own cottage industry. So 9 years ago when we started, there was maybe 1 or 2 sources that I felt like once I read through them, I understood what was going on. But now it's just blowing up to the point where I think that's, for me, hard to dive in until we actually start playing games, because there's so much content and so much difference of opinion that I look at maybe now 5 or 6 different websites during the week when fantasy football season's in play because I want to check out who's recommending who for what waivers, what are the injury reports. There's just so much volume. I'm randomly following beat reporters for various teams on Twitter because they typically have the most up-to-date information. So it's interesting how this thing is blown up. So I think for me, where I come at it is once we get into it and we start drafting, then I'm in. And I enjoy it. But until then, it's just sort of, there's just so much going on that I'm liable to be the guy that may inadvertently draft someone who's injured. I'm hoping not to do that this year. I'll double check. But I think in terms of who I'm not drafting, and you said, I'm assuming based on what you said about Ezekiel Elliott, you're not drafting him, correct?
That is correct. He's not my one to avoid, but I won't draft Ezekiel Elliott. I feel like he has shades of Cadillac Williams from about a decade ago, where he started really hot, but then ended up breaking down near the end. Very different reasons. Cadillac Williams was an upstanding citizen, just his knees went bad. Where I think if Elliott has a lot of distractions off the field, has issues with his teammates, I think we see him kind of fade into the background after this year and next year. He's still an RB2. I'm not drafting him as an elite RB1. If he falls to the 3rd round, I'll take him, but I'm not taking him in the 1st round.
Yeah, I guess for me, and again, I'm not basing this necessarily on anything of actual data, which will be, if you're listening to my picks at home, most of mine are gut instincts, so you probably don't want to follow them. They're not always based in fact. But I feel like one running back in particular that I'm leery of is Leonard Fournette, because I know there was injury issues last year. I feel like when the Jaguars, they got on a streak riding that defense, I just feel like I don't trust Blake Bortles, who's also someone I won't draft. And even though statistically I believe he was really pretty solid in terms of fantasy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just feel like I don't know if I trust the Jaguars yet to pull it all together. And I feel like they would just be running Fournette constantly to the point where I'd worry about injury.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And there's not a good stable of backups in that team. So,
right.
I mean, I would probably draft Fournette in the 2nd. I'm not reaching to RB11 or pick 11 where he's going right now. So we agree in that way. I think my ultimate player do not draft is Mike Evans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yes.
Jameis Winston serving suspension. Jameis Winston was actually pretty fine fantasy-wise as a quarterback, but isn't elevating his wide receivers. And I think the emergence of Chris Godwin is going to take away from Evans, who's had the drops for a long time here. It almost reminds me of another Bucs wide receiver, Mike Williams, and there's been like 9 of them. But the one Mike Williams who was from Syracuse, who was fantastic for 3 years and then just dropped off the face of the earth and couldn't even make a very wide receiver deficited Seahawks team. So at all costs, I'm not picking Mike Williams. Again, unless he falls to the 7th or 8th round, which should never happen in a draft.
Yeah, I think the one that's definitely do not draft is and Jimmy Graham. I think this was 5 years ago. Yes, totally draft, but I'm not trusting Jimmy Graham. I think he's pretty solid. I think if he winds up 5th or 6th, I would take him. But other than that, I'm not interested. And I also want to put a do not draft on Jordy Nelson because I think that his knees are shot. I don't know what you're actually getting out of him in the Raiders offense, which we don't quite know yet whether or not John Gruden's magic will work. But supposedly from camp, he's doing great. But I don't know, man. What are your thoughts on Jordy Nelson?
I think if you're drafting Jordy Nelson at his current ADP of around the 7th round, fine. Yep. But a lot of times people are reaching for him because he has that name value. And as much as Derek Carr was lauded as the savior of the Raiders organization way back when, the last 2 years haven't matched his play. He's not Aaron Rodgers. And I think Jordy has succeeded because of Aaron Rodgers. And I think it's very similar to what we saw with Eric Decker leaving the Broncos. Now, what is Eric Decker? He's not going to make a roster this year. So I think Nelson's better than Decker, but I'm not reaching above a 7th mid-round pick for him.
Let's go into who you are targeting, Franco. Who's someone that you really, and I know that this is maybe tough to say given we're all in the same league, but who's a player that maybe instead of that you specifically want to draft, but that you should definitely draft with maybe within the 1st or 2nd round if you get the opportunity to? 1st
or 2nd round. Well, first off, nobody in our league actually watches our show, so I'm not really worried about that. And you very rarely take my advice, so I'm even less worried about that. So there's that. I think for the 1st round, I want to go running back heavy, just because the wide receiver class is pretty deep. And as much as I'd love to have an Antonio Brown, the points difference between Antonio Brown and a high-functioning T.Y. Hilton is a lot closer than the difference between a David Johnson and we'll say Lamar Miller. That's a pretty huge valley. Another player I'm not going to draft, by the way, Lamar Miller. But so I think if we're targeting someone in the first round, I would really love to pick up Saquon Barkley because I think he's going to fall to the 6th pick in the draft. In most drafts, you're not redraft. I would take up David Johnson. I think he might fall to the 10th pick just because of the way the draft's going to fall on his injury concerns. And everybody seems to forget that he hurt his arm, not his leg. So the chances of him bouncing back are pretty high. And then the quarterback play in Arizona is going to be spotty. And he's a great release valve. So I'm all in on David Johnson if you have an early pick.
I think for me it's Barkley, but I doubt, and particularly in our league, that I'm going to get the opportunity to draft it. But I think that's the most enticing, where I think that you have the possibility. But again, this is also a little bit leery for me because I feel like the Giants with Eli Manning, if they're not getting the quarterback play that they expect, they're going to be just running Barkley constantly, and we don't know how long that is sustainable. So that's something to be slightly leery of, but the high upside. And I think for quarterback, someone who I'm drafting, and it might be a little bit of it's definitely a homer pick. I like Jared Goff. I think he's entertaining. I love the wide receiver core that they have. I think that Jared Goff's going to do well. I think there will be some slight drop off compared to last year, but I think with I always target the younger quarterbacks, where for better or worse. I think especially since we're in a legacy league, Franco, I'm always sort of looking for who's sort of has some stability around him, who had a good year and that will likely continue to have a good year because of the same coach, same system, and that to me is Jared Goff. Yeah,
I like Jared Goff a lot. I think he has a lot of values to pick. One quarterback that's young that I would avoid, who unfortunately I own in the Legacy League, is Deshaun Watson. I think he's going to be a great quarterback, but to maintain the touchdown rate that he threw last year would be impossible. He was at 9.2% touchdown rate per throw. For reference, Tom Brady, who is the greatest quarterback of all time, sans Joe Montana, averages 5.5% over his career. So I sincerely doubt, no matter how good Deshaun Watson is, that he's going to be 4% better than Tom Brady. And at that rate, actually better than Drew Brees' 4.1%. So he's going to come back to earth, and people are drafting right now in the 4th round. So again, if he falls 9th, 10th, you can wait on quarterback. I'm not taking Deshaun Watson.
Speaking of, you mentioned Tom Brady. That's something that is, again, we're in a legacy league, so I think there are people that are just going to hold on to him just because. But if you are not, do you still take him? Because he is 41 years old, coming off of a great Super Bowl, don't get me wrong. But when does that end? Because it has to end at some point, and it seems like we're setting up for a major end. Because if he keeps playing, he is one injury away, it feels like, or just one hit away from being injured or being unable to play at the level that he's been accustomed to for the last couple of years. So how do you navigate or deal with Tom Brady if you're in a league where you have the opportunity to draft him?
I'm avoiding Tom Brady at all costs. And it's not because I don't think he's fantastic. It's because the Patriots have made an effort not to surround him with effective pass catchers. Chris Hogan is currently their wide receiver 1 with Edelman suspended. Chris Hogan couldn't make a roster on the Dolphins back when Chad Ochocinco was getting kicked off the team. So I don't have a lot of faith in the wide receivers. I like Sonny Michel and James White, and if they shift to James White into the slot, maybe it matters, but there's just too much risk in that way. And then remember Peyton Manning threw the most touchdowns ever in one season, and then the drop-off the next year was so significant that he got benched for Brock Osweiler, the Brock Lobster, who we now know is horrible. So I'm very nervous. I think he'll play well, but I'm not willing to be on the side of that gamble where he doesn't, and I've wasted a top 5 pick on a quarterback that's useless.
Who's your sleeper pick for this year, Franco? Who's somebody that you think is going to be you might get laughed at in your draft, but you're going to be laughing at the end of the day?
So I'm going to cheat and use 2 players, but I am absolutely reaching for Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones, the 2 running backs of the Green Bay Packers, and in fact, I've done one draft where I've taken them back-to-back. Reason being is that the Green Bay Packers offense is going to be fluid, even though Jimmy Graham's probably not going to be an amazing wide receiver or tight end, or wide receiver / tight end, really, was his argument back when he was with the Saints. He's going to be amazing this year, but he's going to help that offense move along, and I think a healthy Aaron Rodgers makes the running back position valid again. Jamal Williams, over the last, 7 games of the year, was RB11 in fantasy. And I think Aaron Jones is more talented. So if you take both of them, you hedge your bet, you get a possible RB1 low end for what will end up being a 9th or 10th round pick. So that's who I'm taking in every draft back-to-back. How about you?
For me, I think I just was doing. I am interested in seeing how Royce Freeman for the Denver Broncos goes. I think that's an interesting potential, just because it seems like he may have the ability to be the guy out there. And it's for a wide receiver. It's not necessarily a sleeper, but I enjoyed how well he did on my own team, so I'm going to promote him. Cooper Kupp, love it. Love me some beautiful boy, Cooper Kupp. And while you have Woods out there on the side for the Los Angeles Rams, Cooper Kupp seemed to be the go-to for Jared Goff. So that's a nice flex option if you're able to pick him up. I don't think it's worth a first, second, or third round pick, but in those later rounds, if you're looking for somebody and he's still there, I think you take a flyer with a sixth or seventh maybe. You think lower than that? I love Cooper Kupp.
I love Cooper Kupp too, but don't forget that they got Sammy Watkins and Brandon Cooks, and Woods is still there, and McVay loves Woods. So
Watkins isn't there anymore, I don't think.
Oh, you're right. My bad.
Yeah.
He went.
So it's just Cooks, Woods. I know, and he's the wide receiver 3, but still on that slant route.
I know you're right.
Picking up touchdowns.
Well, my original argument with Cooks still stands. I think Cooks is redundant to Kupp's skill set, and I think Cooks is far better wide receiver. So if I'm sitting back and I'm waiting to double-digit rounds for Kupp, I think it's good. You're keeping him in your legacy league. I just wouldn't draft him as high as he's going.
Fair point.
And goodbye, Sammy Watkins. I forgot you're going to the Chiefs. My bad.
Yeah.
Enjoy the Chiefs.
That's all right. $40 million deal with the Chiefs. Yeah. All right. The world's most expensive decoy. It's going to be exciting for that. So we'll do some highlights, and I think what we'll start doing, Franco, highlights of fantasy football as the weeks progress. And we'll also be doing the your buying and selling. That has become a staple of the program. So I'm excited for that because that's very helpful for me. But even though you typically take your own advice and then I don't get anything, but that's okay. I have a good time and you can teach everybody out there in the world. But fantasy football, good luck to all of you with doing your drafts. And like I said, for the next couple of months, we'll be talking fantasy football as part of our segments moving forward. But let's go into just preseason in general, Franco. It's been a weird preseason. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it just feels like a lot of teams are pulling their starters and not really using it. That even, Todd Gurley said it's a luxury to not have to play in the preseason or participate at training camp. So if you're the league and you're reading this and you're seeing, for a great example, as when the Raiders came to the Rams and Gruden and McVay said, why would we bother playing our starters when we're going to be playing each other in week 1? So it just seems like a really dumb long-term thing for the NFL to deal with. And I know that there's preseason that for some players and some teams, it's not, there's opportunity there to look at what they have on their staff, but I feel like they've got to cut some of these games because we already have some high-profile injuries. Yeah,
but here's the interesting part about that. The rate of injury isn't actually progressed at all over the years. It's been about the same. The only difference is since fantasy football has become, as you said, a cottage industry, we're now starting to really note the players injured and following that, making a bigger deal out of it. I think the preseason's important because you have players coming off injury, like Teddy Bridgewater, or you have players fighting for roster spots, like Cooper Kupp was a year ago. So I just think it's a valuable thing. I do think we will see teams start to pull starters out, and it'll be a lot truer competition among roster spot battles. But I don't think we'll see a change in it. The reason being is the NFL makes too much money selling preseason tickets. Preseason games are still sold out, and there's still TV rights to them. So it's not going to go away, and I think the rate of injury is kind of overblown, if only because now we're more aware of who's getting injured.
Yeah, and I think to your point, too, about those games are sold out because they also tether them to your regular season. So you have to pay for those preseason tickets if you want regular season tickets. So I think if they ever change that policy, you might see a decrease in people that want to actually go. But I think people are going just because they are obligated to. But it is interesting to see. It is often cheaper. But I don't know. I think that at some point, I feel like we always can tag this conversation at the beginning of each football season about what to do with the preseason, and just for the players' sake, they don't seem to care about it as much as the NFL wants them to. So I think at some point something's got to bend a little bit. Maybe we see that in next labor negotiations. Maybe they limit it to 3 preseason games. Maybe you do one that's a practice game, but it's really not something that's full pads or televised, or maybe they modify it in some way, you know what I mean? But I don't know. Moving forward, we'll have to see. But preseason, I haven't watched much, except for when you, like you said, with fantasy football, you do get a better sense of who's injured and who's not. All right, so moving on from that, let's go to WWE Summerslam, Franco. We watched it together. I enjoyed it watching with you, Mike Cianzo. Ken Torgiani was here as a special guest in my abode, so it was a good time. The big takeaway is that Roman Reigns finally, after 3 years, won the WWE Universal Championship from Brock Lesnar after some shenanigans with Braun Strowman, who I really actually like this. We can maybe talk about both of these things. I really like that he came out with the Money in the Bank briefcase and said, I'm going to fight one of you. I'm not going to do this and be a chicken and take advantage of an opportunity when somebody's laid out. I thought that was cool. It helped with the crowd because the crowd was a little bit more invested in what was going on. But ultimately, Roman Reigns won after Lesnar got distracted beating up Braun Strowman. And now we move into the new era with Roman Reigns as our champion. Franco, how did you feel about that moment? We'll unpack what happened on Raw after.
Well, first, I think they want you to call it the Roman Empire, the beginning of the Roman Empire, because we're not too old for plays on words. But
yeah,
I wish I cared more than I did.
Yeah.
I did like the Braun Strowman approach to it. I think having come out, pop the crowd in a match that might have been booed out of the building without him, I think him saying that he's not going to be a coward about it fits the character they're building and the whole put these hands on you thing. So I think that was successful. I think it's the best way they could have done it. And I'm kind of sad we didn't get the whole Roman Reigns wins the championship, gets pinned again, like they've done to him twice now. The third time would have been the charm. But I think it's going to be fine. And then I think they made a smart decision on Raw, which I'll let you seg to, that I think will float Roman for a while, at least as a face.
Yeah, so they did a Shield. They finally did the Shield reunion, a proper Shield reunion this time around, where in a match against Finn Balor that was a match of Finn Balor versus Roman Reigns for the championship, which I also thought was a nice nod to the fans of, yes, Roman will be defending this and not like Brock Lesnar where he only shows up once in a while.
Yeah.
But Roman defeated Finn, and then Braun Strowman came out to cash in. But then the Shield came out and they did the triple powerbomb spot to Strowman, and essentially you've got a united Rollins, Ambrose, and Reigns, which I think this works out really well. It was a little bit of a surprise. I don't think anybody was really expecting the Shield to pop up, but it does protect Roman, and I don't know yet if they're going to turn them full heel or have them just sort of be in-betweeners. I feel like they're going to be in-betweeners for right now because Rollins and Ambrose are currently faces. Well, they're all three are faces, so there really isn't any indication yet as to where they align, but I think they're in it for themselves, and maybe that's just where it stands, like a Stone Cold-esque where neither good nor bad, just on their own. But it makes it a little bit more interesting to me, Franco. I wasn't interested in a solo Reigns run. I thought that would have been excruciatingly boring, but this is intriguing.
I think it is too, and I think by pairing Reigns with two really solid faces the crowd pops for, they're going to generate pop for Reigns as opposed to the Roman sucks chance. So it's a good way to insulate their champion. I do think they stay faces, but I think they go the route of the anti-hero face that the Shield kind of filled before, where they do heelish activities, but the crowd loves it anyway. And it's a good sign that they popped the crowd beating up Strowman, who has been kind of the uber face of the company recently. So it's one of those rare things where the WWE uses their roster effectively and decided to find a way finally to make Reigns a valid face. So we'll see how long it lasts. I think they'll screw it up, and I think Ambrose will turn on the other two, and that's what we'll be. We'll be back to the old stuff. But for the time being, good job.
Yeah, I think we maybe get 3 months out of this, and then we have an Ambrose heel turn, maybe less than that. I feel like, back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, this would have been a slow year-long burn. I'm thinking to the Evolution storyline, where Evolution was together for almost a full year, I think, and then they had Randy Orton, then they turned on him, and then Batista turned. Like, that was about a 2-3 year storyline that was exciting, and that meant a lot. I mean, I still remember sitting next to you in college watching Batista give the thumbs down on Triple H and powerbombing him through a table. Like, I remember that contract signing vividly because it was so cool, because it had been building and building. It was done really well. I just don't know if WWE has the interest to put in the time for this, because I think if they do put in the time, like you said, it's going to be great. But I think they're going to probably pull the trigger 6 months too soon, and then it's not going to mean anything, really. It's just going to be another switch. But we'll have to see. But I think ultimately we are in the Roman Empire, as you so delicately and beautifully put it, Franco. So I guess I have to live with that for now. But let's jump to, you saw a movie in the last minute or two that we've got. You saw Happy Time Murders. I'm not sure if I want to see it. Franco, do I?
No. Put it frankly. So I'll be honest, I did partake in, I think I had 2 beers going into it.
Nice.
And all the jokes that you see in the previews are pretty much the jokes in the film with some filler. And I fell asleep before the climax. And I very rarely fall asleep in movies. So I actually fell asleep watching the movie. So that's my review. The Franco Sleepyhead is full on the Happy Time Murders.
Now, did you pay for that or did you use a movie pass?
I don't use MoviePass because, unlike you, I'm not willing to gamble on a company that's struggling to stay above water. So I paid for it, sadly. Sad face.
But to be fair, because MoviePass might be going away, I did get it as a gift. So I have a year membership as a gift, so I don't feel that is up in December. So my wife and I need to decide whether or not we want to parlay that. We actually were doing the math, and just to touch on this real briefly, MoviePass is still the best deal, but they have limited the movies so much that you're not going to be able to really see popular films, so you have to be able to live with that you might want to explore indie films or other movies that are out there.
Yeah.
The other thing is that the AMC A-list, while really cool and allows you to go see movies 3 times a week, any movies that they show, it's $20 a month. So for 2 people, you're upwards of about $550 per person just for tickets for the year. And if you really have to do the math and as to whether or not you would utilize it, which right now, even though I had MoviePass and I saw a lot of movies for free, it still doesn't even come to half the cost of what it would be for 2 people on the A-list. So it's going to be interesting to see where this price point falls, Franco. I think that you and I talked a little bit about this, and I agree with you. You think someone's going to swoop in and buy MoviePass and then make it work. But for now, it's still struggling, still chugging along, but we'll have to see. So, Franco, I believe we're about that time where I need to ask you what you learned today. So, Franco, what did you learn?
I learned that we've come a long way from our first shows with 3 minutes of fantasy analysis, and most of that was some intern pressing the bus sound for 5 times too many, to being a full-fledged television show with, I think, an audience. Thank you, audience.
Thanks.
Yeah, so what have you learned?
I learned that I will probably still continue to just not really do much research in fantasy football and see how it goes. I've done pretty well. I almost won once. Maybe if I tried, I'll win more, but we'll find out. For the BFF Show, my name is Brendan.
I'm Franco.
Have a good week.
Peace.
The fire rises.